All right, we are going to talk about the first chapter of James M. Johnston's Radical Behaviorism for ABA Practitioners. In this first chapter, he really gives us an in-depth view of what free will is and how it relates to ABA. We're going to have step-by-step definitions and a little bit more clarification on how it relates to the field. So Johnston explains that free will are choices that believing in choices are not caused by environmental or even hereditary factors and are free of any outside influences. So we have to sort of let go of our connotations about what free will are and understand that in this context, it means that things are random and illogical. It's not determined by physical variables, and an individual's behavior is solely the product of mental deliberation, and that internal willpower is not susceptible to any of these outside influences. So when we're talking about mental deliberation, he gives us examples. It's anytime that we use the words thinking, choosing, deciding, and even when we talk about something being careless or irrational or a poor decision, it still insinuates that a mental process did not take place when it should have. So Johnston explains that even in our everyday language and our culture really focuses on free will. Our entire lives that we have been told that our decisions are up to us and that we have control over our destiny. He gives us a few phrases that we will commonly hear that show how predominant the assumption of free will is. So on the flip side, determinism is going to be the assumption that behavior is determined by hereditary or environmental factors, physical variables, or cumulative learning history. An important thing that he notes is that accepting determinism does not require one to know what those variables are. So even if you assume that all behavior has causes, we do not usually know what they are. Really like that he clarifies that even if we were able to point to certain environmental factors as possible causes for our behavior, it does not mean that we are even right or that those are in fact the factors that are operating. It's also interesting to note that he states that our convictions about our actions will often be biased. So what does this even have to do with science? Johnston is very clear in his writing that science needs determinism. If you're a scientist and you're attempting to explain how the physical universe works, it would be absolutely impossible if there was variation and if there was no order, if everything was random. If events happen for no reason and phenomena would just randomly occur, this would render a scientist's work pointless. If you think about it, a cause and effect relationship found today, if it wouldn't be true tomorrow, then how would we ever have any type of reliable findings? And it would be impossible to further our scientific knowledge. He then ties behavior science into all other hard sciences and talks about how it is a natural science. I like this quote of his: behavior is a physical event, of course, and there is no scientific reason to assume it should not. It should be an exception to this general assumption of determinism. So behavioral science and free will explains how they interact with each other. The assumption of free will would mean that a behavior can occur for no reason and that it does not follow a logical pattern. So this would make the job of reducing a behavior impossible, since there would be no cause. He basically brings up the point that why bother if we believe in the assumption of free will, that it would be particularly disheartening to the field of ABA, since ABA focuses on improving socially relevant problems. Johnston also lays out many of the different arguments against the assumption of determinism. He talks about how it's not possible to have proof, that you cannot gather evidence that behavior occurs without being influenced by heredity, personal history, the environment, physical variables, because even within a lab, you would not be able to create an experiment that controls for these factors. And it's not possible to identify all the factors that might contribute to influence human or animal behavior. So therefore, you're not going to be able to have an experiment to prove if free will or determinism is the right philosophical belief. He also brings up the fact that scientists are parsimonious, which makes this debate pointless. They're not going to extend themselves past the attitude of determinism because there's no empirical evidence that suggests that we do have free will. He also brings up some other issues, point by point attacks the argument for free will. Johnson states that a non-physical causation, aka the mental deliberation, couldn't cause something that's physical. He also explains that believing in free will he also explains that believing in determinism does not mean that you don't have responsibility for your actions. Even though in the scientific sense we might not be responsible for our behavior, in this context, our behavior will always still have consequences. So you cannot go break the law or violate social or cultural norms without having a consequence for doing so. And also found it interesting to note that he talks about that free will debate often gets into arguing semantics, and that we need to let go of any other word choice and connotations and just understand that free will means that you're stating that the environment and outside influences do not play a role in our behavior. Johnston goes on to discuss his view about the consequences for practitioners, and that leads me to my discussion question. I'm interested in what are your thoughts about how the assumption of free will impacts ABA? Has the topic of free will been a challenge for you in your work if you are currently in the field? And if it has not been a challenge for you so far, do you feel that it will?